Hi, this is Kasem. 8 years ago this week, back in 1990, one of the top hits in the USA was The Heart of the Matter, a song from an album by Don Henley, an album that earned him praise on the floor of Congress as a spokesman for his generation. I'll have details and that top hit after this.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Kasem. We've got 11 big hits to go on our way to number 1. And falling 3 notches to number 11 is a singer-songwriter whose first group was called Shiloh. After it broke up, he joined Linda Ronstadt's backup band, which later gave birth in 1971 to the Eagles. After the Eagles broke up in 1980, he decided to go out on his own. And the result has been a very successful solo career for Don Henley.
Casey's Top 40.
Now we're up to the latest hit for singer-songwriter Don Henley, a man who refuses to mess with success. He won't change his ways, at least not unless he absolutely has to. You see, ever since he was an aspiring musician struggling to make it in Los Angeles back in the late 60s, Don has written his songs on small scraps of paper, corners he'd pull off of envelopes, the backs of menus, napkins, whatever. And to this day, he still writes on whatever scraps happen to be around. Other songwriters have suggested he discover the wonders of the computer age. But Don says there's a bit of magic to writing songs, and he's afraid if he changes his ways, the quality of the songs will change as well. Another thing Don won't change are his listening habits. Most other rock musicians check out lots of new music to find out what's going on. Elton John is famous for listening to every new song that debuts on the chart. But Don Henley says he almost never listens to anyone else's music. He says, quote, "I've never heard U2, REM, or heavy metal. I don't want to hear something and find myself copying it. My music just comes out of my head." And speaking of Don's head, that's another thing he won't change. You see, for many years, he's had problems with his tonsils. Don told us, quote, "They've tried to take him out several times, and I've just refused. I'm afraid it'll change my voice, even though my doctors assure me that it won't. I don't want to change a thing." Well, this week, the only thing that's changing for Don Henley is his spot on our survey. His latest hit moves up 4 notches to number 20. From the CD, The End of the Innocents, here's The Last Worthless Evening.
Casey's Top 40.
Radio plays them, Radio and Records ranks them, and we count them down on Casey's Top 40. Now, we're up to the latest hit for an ex-Eagle who was born in the midst of one of the worst tornadoes ever to ravage North Texas. He says that storm made him what he is today. It was back on July 22nd, 1947, that there was a terrible stillness across the plains of North Texas, an area known as Tornado Alley. Not a bird could be heard, not a leaf stirred. Then the day began to grow unnaturally cold, sending the farmers of Upshur County and their families scrambling for their storm shelters, because they knew what that dreaded stillness meant. A tornado was headed their way. It was a big one, too. A tall, mean twister that ripped the roof off the local gymnasium, flattened houses for miles around, and left a path of devastation in its wake. It was a miracle that no one was killed, for it was the most destructive tornado to cross that part of Texas in years, a tornado of unusually fierce fury. Now, as the whirlwind swept down upon the small town of Linden, a man named CJ and his pregnant wife, Huleen, were trying to make it to the nearby Raglan Finlaw Clinic. Because, you see, their baby had decided that this was the moment he wanted to be born. CJ and Huleen managed to make it to the clinic safely. And it was there, even as the storm raged and howled outside, that their son sang the first song of his life, the unpracticed cry all babies make. They named their son Don. Today, at the age of 42, Don Henley says he's always suspected that being born during that twister had an effect on him. He thinks it made him more restless than others, less satisfied with the status quo. And he says that sometimes late at night, when it's really quiet, if he closes his eyes, he can still hear that tornado howling through North Texas. And he says he can also hear that sound in the songs he writes. This week, one of those songs whirls in at number 37 in our survey.
And at number 24 this week is the current hit by Don Henley, who first hit the charts back in the 1970s with the Eagles. He and Glenn Frey would split up lead vocal duties for the group. So which was the first Eagle hit to feature Don singing lead? Well, it was this one. Waving hair and ruby lips. From 1972, that's Witchy Woman by the Eagles, a song that went to number 9. And it was the first Eagles hit to go top 10 and the first record by the group featuring Don Henley on lead vocal.
Music.
The 70s supergroup The Eagles are flying higher than ever following the enormous success of the Common Threads tribute album. So now leaders and longtime feuders, Glenn Frey and Don Henley, are talking about burying the hatchet and hitting the road for that much-anticipated reunion tour. The time looks right. Not only has the tribute album sold more than 2 million copies in 3 months, but sales of the old Eagles albums are up now more than 20%. And what could a reunion tour gross for the boys? Industry experts predict it could top $50 million. Well, I guess you could just call this story the end of the innocence. Geffen Records is airing their dirty laundry, so to speak, and they announced that they're suing their artist Don Henley for $30 million. The suit is in answer to the notice of termination Henley sent the label back in December. Geffen says Henley owes them albums. Henley says he's out of there. I have a feeling that's just the beginning of this story.
Casey's Top 40.
Now we're up to our highest debut, a new song by Sheryl Crow. She might have spent her entire career doing background vocals for other stars, but Don Henley told her to gather up her courage and start turning down work. Sheryl didn't start out to be a background singer. She wanted a solo career. But when she arrived in Los Angeles 6 years ago, she didn't know anybody, and she soon found that singing backgrounds was the easiest way to get work and to pay her bills. Starting at the lowest rung of the ladder, Sheryl began by singing backgrounds on demo sessions at $35 a pop. And gradually she worked her way up to some better-paying sessions. At one of those sessions, she heard about a job singing backgrounds on tour for Michael Jackson. She auditioned for the job and got it. From then on, Sheryl Crow had her credentials as a top-notch backup singer. And following a round-the-world jaunt with Michael Jackson, she did sessions and tours for other big stars like Stevie Wonder, Rod Stewart, and Don Henley. Now, despite the great experiences Sheryl Crow was having and the fact that stars like Eric Clapton and Winona had recorded songs she wrote, success as a solo artist still seemed far away. And it might have stayed away if Sheryl's friend and former boss, Don Henley, hadn't given her some good advice. Don said, quote, "You write really good songs. Nobody does them better than you, but people see you as a background singer. You should start turning down work," unquote. Well, scary as it might be, Sheryl took Don Henley's advice, and instead of lending her songs and her voice to others, she started saving her best material for herself. And once she made the commitment and devoted herself to a solo career full-time, she got her break, a record contract. This spring, Sheryl had her first top 40 hit, Leaving Las Vegas. And this week, her latest hit is our highest debut.
Casey's biggest hits.
2 years ago this week, one of the biggest hits in the USA was Sometimes Love Just Ain't Enough. A duet that might never have happened had one singer not told the other he'd put her up at the best hotel in Beverly Hills. For a long time, Don Henley had been trying to get singer Patti Smythe to do a duet with him. But Patti kept turning him down. She was trying to get her solo career going and thought a duet might get in the way. Los Angeles-based Don Henley finally asked New York-based Patti Smythe what it would take to get her to Hollywood. She said that, well, she'd always wanted to stay at the fabled Beverly Hills Hotel. And Don said that if that was what she wanted, it was done. Which is how Patti Smythe wound up spending a week at the legendary Pink Palace, and how Don Henley got his duet.
America's Top Hits.
8 years ago this week, back in 1990, one of the top hits in the USA was from an album by Don Henley. An album that earned him praise from the floor of Congress as a spokesman for his generation. It's an album that was released in 1989, and it quickly became apparent that like Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, the album titled The End of the Innocence was more than just another CD. It was a brilliant collection of songs about the frustrations of a generation, the baby boomers, who had begun their lives so full of hope and had gone on to face decades of increasing frustration. So important was this message that after this album's release, several congressmen rose to recommend it to their colleagues and to ask that the lyrics be entered into the congressional record. 8 years ago this week, a song from The End of the Innocence was one of the top hits in the USA.
American Top 20.